Could you explain in simple terms, what does a recruiter do aside from reading CVs?
In simple terms, we basically find people for companies, right? Whether you would be working at an agency, like a recruitment agency, or in-house is another type of recruiter where you're only basically recruiting for one company that you work for, and you're typically part of either a recruitment team or part of HR. So recruitment is essentially an extension of HR, of human resources, right? So we don't deal with anything to do with internal people, like internal employees within a company. We deal with the outside world, right?
Kind of
So
like
we
an
don't
external
yes,
HR. Yeah.
exactly. So that's why like I usually like to call it as like we're like an arm of HR, right? We're the
Right.
ones that are like outside. We reach out. We deal with typically outside people on a regular basis, and the
Right.
internal people that we deal with for the most part are typically hiring managers.
Right.
So we deal with candidates outside of the company and the internal hiring managers, right? So we're essentially providing services for the company, whatever company we work for, whether it be in-house recruitment type of work. We're still like, providing service, customer service essentially to our internal clients, which are essentially hiring managers. So day-to-day basis, it could vary, right, depending on the type of company and the volume, but there's definitely a lot of interviewing. That's what we do, because we're essentially the gatekeepers between the outside world and the hiring managers or a company, right? So we're the filter. So anyone coming to the company, we're usually the first people that strangers will meet, right, before they even meet anybody else in the company. Granted that, the company has like a recruitment process set up, right? Some smaller companies don't have a dedicated recruiter, so maybe the hiring managers will be involved in recruitment themselves. But if there is a team of recruiters that are dedicated to doing this job, then yeah, we would be the dedicated people and the gatekeeper of the outside world. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more to it, right? But essentially, we review candidates, we interview people, we make sure that they, fit the company needs and cultures and whatnot. And we also help with the onboarding process. So from the time that they get interviewed to the time that they get hired is part of recruitment process. Anything after new candidates step into the company, that's typically the human resources job to basically deal with them, right? So we don't typically deal with anything to do with payroll, setups, or anything like that. We just deal, the last paperwork that we deal with is the contracts, the employment contracts that we would create and send to people.
So once they sign, you move on to the next candidate.
Exactly. Once they sign, that's basically closed, right? And then we move on to the next job or whatever.
What does your day look like exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny question when I saw that question, because it literally varies from job to job and from company to company, right? Because every company has different processes too. So it depends. In my previous job, before I joined my current company, I was the only recruiter in the entire company, right? So I dealt with a lot of interviews. Like, it was heavily interview based.
Right.
I was interviewing people from like morning to the end of my day, right? And at that time too, I didn't do any of the paperwork when it comes to the hiring portion, like the offers and stuff like that. Like the HR team handled that. But now, for example, I also do a lot of interviews, but I also have a little bit more admin work because I do the contract and I'm the one who negotiate and send contracts. So it depends, right? But definitely always, as recruiters, a big chunk of your day is going to be interviewing.
Is it typical that the recruiters do contracts as well, or?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, typically in larger companies where there's already like separation between recruitment team and HR team. Yes, typically like that's part of the recruitment process. If it's in a small company, like a startup, for example, when you're a little bit more hands-on and you do kind of touch on different things, sometimes you have to do it all too. Sometimes as a recruiter, you could get involved in some HR aspect too, depending on how big the company is, right? But if there's a separate HR team as well, like you could be involved less in the HR stuff. but you could still be doing contracts and negotiating salaries and stuff like that when you're offering. So typically the part of the recruitment process in every company really, when a job opens up, for example, right, from the hiring managers or from whatever team that's looking for people, the first job as a recruiter is that you would go do what we call an intake call. It's basically like a short introductory or interview call with the hiring manager, and as a recruiter you would basically ask a bunch of questions to the hiring manager, like, what are you looking for, what does your team need, right? What are some of the hard skills that you need in this new person, like what are some of the soft skills that this person may need. So we based on those the criteria that's given to us, and then that's how we would start recruiting, right? So yeah, 100% you need to understand the job. Typically, we would also ask questions like, what does the day-to-day look like for this position, right? What are they going to be doing every day? Who are they going to be working with every day? What kind of tools or softwares or whatever that they're going to need to know. So 100%. And also, like, if you work in a large company as a recruiter, you're not going to be working on one job. You're going to have like so many different jobs. Sometimes typically maybe 25 to 30 openings that you're deal with at the same time. Even if you work in a small company, and if you're alone, let's say you're the only recruiter in terms of like HR group as general, right? You can be dealing with 25, 30 recs, like requisitions, open positions basically. So that's pretty normal, right? That's busy. If you have like 10 openings, that's like a little quiet, right? But if you get to the point where you're like 15, that's like a good number of openings to work on it per person. 25 to 30 is a lot, but it's very common nowadays in larger companies. So like you're gonna have to know each one of those positions that are open, and you have to understand what the requirements are, because also when you're interviewing people, you will know exactly like where people can go, because sometimes people apply for one thing, but they can actually fit for another job, right? So if you're as a recruiter, if you don't know your jobs like that you're working on, you're going to be missing out on people, right? Because then you're going to be only focusing on like one, or if you don't know half of your jobs, you're going to miss out on some people that may fit those jobs when they apply for something else. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like matchmaking and puzzle pieces, like you're moving people around, right? So if you're a good recruiter and you understand the jobs that you're hiring for, you can literally be interviewing one person for like 5 different jobs. Does that make sense? When you're asking questions, you can also ask like, oh, have you done this? Have you done that? Sounds like you're kind of into this more than this one. So, would you be interested in this role instead? So it's like, kind of matchmaking for sure.
I'm going to put that as the podcast title, the matchmaker of
we're
jobs.
Literally we're like professional matchmakers.
Right.